Hello, everybody, and welcome again. I'm Srishti Chipre, and you are listening to the Purple Science Podcast. It's been almost one full year that we have recovered from the COVID 19 pandemic, and in a way, we are still recovering from it. Although these were very hard times for us, but there are so many lessons that we've learned from this process. One of the most important lessons, in my opinion, was that an illness, does not necessarily need to be physical. It can very possibly also be mental and requires equal or sometimes even more attention. Since the pandemic, I think we are doing much better in terms of awareness concerning mental health issues. Initiatives are taken up all across the country, and I feel that awareness can really solve half of this problem. Today's episode is very special. We have with us a close friend of mine. I've known Abha for quite some time now, and I have seen her journey of facing certain issues and the taboo surrounding it to then not just recovering from them herself, but actively working to empower other people to do the same. She's currently a student at IISER Thiruvananthapuram, and along with her peers, she's working on a project where she uses her critical thinking skills, her scientific temperament, where her strengths lie, to better diagnose and better resolve the issues surrounding mental health. I'll not say much, you will hear all about the project from her. A little disclaimer before we start: when we were recording this, it was raining on my end and the network was not great, which caused my voice to be a little trembly and unclear. I've tried to make the overall experience as decent as was possible for me, and I've also added some notes and relevant links in the description. The most important thing is that the content reaches you and, in fact, reaches as many people as possible. Thanks for understanding and thanks for supporting the podcast. Let's move on to the episode. I have known you personally for quite some time now, and I know that mental health has been a major theme for you in the past few years. So, would you like to share some personal experiences with us that have shaped the way you think and your opinions on mental health awareness and the work that you do for improving the general mental well being of students and people in general today?
All right, Srishti. So, for some background on this, I have been diagnosed with both borderline personality disorder as well as major depressive disorder. So, if we're dissecting them one by one, borderline personality disorder is one of the eight main personality disorders that psychologists find. But in that, this issues with borderline personality is that you genuinely do not know who you are because you change very quickly. If I say today that, oh, I like this set of things, I like this particular thing, maybe in 2 weeks or a month, it might not be the same. I would look like a completely different person to the people who know me. But to myself, it feels like, oh, nothing has changed. And along with this, it's also very hard for us to be emotionally stable in the sense we get angry quickly, we get sad quickly. When we feel joy, it's the sort of very intense joy. And all of these feelings actually result in a sort of physical sense as well. Because if I'm feeling sad, then it's like my chest is trying to crush me. But if I feel happy, it's also like I'm so happy that I'm breathless. All of this sort of shows up physically in BPD patients. And this, for me, sort of coincided with the depressive phases that come with my major depressive disorder, which is basically months almost of me not being able to do anything, not being, not having the energy to do anything. Everything that I love sort of felt boring at that point, bland. I did not want to do anything that I genuinely loved doing maybe a month back. The food that I liked did not taste as nice. The people that I was hanging out with seemed like it took too much effort to hang out with them. So that, along with the sort of physical sense that the borderline personality disorder brings into the picture, it was very, very hard to get through that because it was a very heavy feeling. So at that point, it was just very confusing because it did not make sense to me because nobody around me was going through any of that. So why is it just me, or where is this coming from? What is wrong? Was the sort of questions that I was asking myself at that point. So my diagnosis actually took place in 2017 when I was in 12th grade, but it took me a while to get validated, as in for people to actually accept my diagnosis. And by people, I mean both the people around me, as in my family, as well as the actual psychiatrists and psychologists that I was meeting. Because when you're giving a sort of personality disorder diagnosis, you have to be very sure about it. You can't, think of it halfway and then be like, okay, it might be. So the validation took a lot of time, since it was around 12th standard. A lot of people said that it might be school stress, or it might be stress showing up in some other way, and it might not be actual depression. So it took till 2020, which is 3 years after my first diagnosis, for a psychiatrist to finally validate my diagnosis and say, hey, you actually do have both BPD and MDD. So going through this diagnosis process itself, it sort of leads you into this mental debate, what we usually call imposter syndrome. So it's like, do I really have issues? Am I faking something to get attention from people? Are my issues not really that important? You start thinking of those things yourself. And the fact that your diagnosis is not validated sort of like pushes you deeper into that spiral. So I think when you said about what I the work that I do towards fixing this, currently we are doing a research project which is based on diagnosing clinical depression. And the reason why I chose this project is specifically because of the sort of process that I had to go through and the effect that it had on me. So it's a project that's very personal to me.
Yeah, that's very true. And of course, a very important question again, that if our peers around us are facing something like this, and because when it comes to academia and institutions, everybody is focused on their own careers, and of course that is important. They have to do their best. We don't really have time to focus on others problems because we are going through a lot. But if you see somebody like this facing through some of these issues, who do you direct them to, and what can you do to help them help themselves, is the question.
Right. So the first thing that you need to do as an individual, when somebody else comes to you saying, hi, I am going through something and I do not know how to deal with it, is to first make sure, like I said earlier, to make sure that they feel validated in that their problems actually exist and it is not a problem to feel that way. It is not something that is abnormal. It is something that happens to a lot of people, and it is something that we can take care of. So rather than making them fear what they are going through, make sure that they calmly are able to go ahead with the rest of the process. Once that conversation is done, what I generally do is, if it's within the institution, if it's peers within the institution, I'll direct them to the institutional appointed psychologist or psychiatrist, depending on what they need. If they do not feel comfortable with those within the institution, it's pretty easy to find, because every government hospital is required to have a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So it's pretty easy to find access depending on your location. And in some cases, for example, if one of my queer friends come up to me and say that they have issues, they might need specific therapists who have dealt with this, who are queer affirmative and know how to deal with their issues a little more sensitively. And in that case, there's an organization known as Mariwala Health Initiative, and they have a list of Indian therapists, Indian psychologists, and psychiatrists who have gone through something that is known as QACP, which is Queer Affirmative Counseling Practice. So, whatever your background is, whatever you've gone through, there is always somebody out there who can help you.
So we'll come to the project, of course. But when you said in your 12th standard when you were diagnosed and people said it was school stress, maybe it's not all, but it definitely contributes to that. I think we have had so many students. I have talked to so many students, and on the podcast itself, we have had discussions that entrance exams, academia in general, especially in science, can be really tiring, can be really draining sometimes. So, on behalf of all the students, can you highlight what are some challenges that we face and how can we improve the situation for us? Also, how can we be more considerate to students in science and research? I'm sure it will apply to all students. Okay.
Oh, definitely. So entrance exams is, I think, a very specific issue that, especially in India, that we deal with. So it usually happens around the time when you're 17, 18, and it is a time in your life where you haven't fully understood yourself yet. So it's a lot of pressure for someone who has not figured out their personality, who hasn't figured out what they want in life, what they actually like. So in a state where you're still moldable, there is this immense pressure on you, and then it definitely might cause a lot of people to crack under that pressure. And I feel like academia is also very similar in that sense, because till the second you turn 18, you are told that you are still a child and you cannot make your own decisions, and suddenly the second you turn 18, you're thrown into adulthood and you have responsibilities and decisions and questions that can shape your entire life. So this sudden amount of pressure on people is definitely a big problem. So it's not something that gradually increases as well, because if you gradually increase the pressure, it's a lot easier to learn to deal with it. You adapt a lot easier. But I feel like entrance exams are the equivalent of throwing kids into the deep end of the pool to learn to swim, where suddenly you're very confused and you have no idea what to do, and people expect you to know what to do at that point as well. So to be more considerate to these students, the changes, instead of on a personal level, they have to start on an institutional level. And by that, I don't mean just in schools or in academic institutions. Everybody who's involved in raising a child into an adult. So, you know how they say that it takes a village to raise a child? It really does. So, every person who's involved in your life, whether that's your family, your relatives, your neighbors, the people who you might meet randomly, all of these people leave some sort of a mark on you. And when you're going through something like this, all of these people need to be able to support you through it instead of sort of push you down. So, for specific things that we can do to be more considerate to these students, I feel like, if, for example, on a school level, if mental health leaves, for example, were more accessible. So, off the top of my head, I remember this whole pressure that we had to have 100% attendance in school. So, that was, I feel like it's not achievable for most people. Even if you don't physically get sick, you still have some days where you just cannot get up out of bed and go and work the same way you would on other days. So the option to at least take a day off needs to be available. Other than that, I also feel like in schools, especially in colleges, I haven't seen it as much because I feel like people are a little more understanding. But in schools, there's this big stigma surrounding, counseling and therapy. And we used to have a counseling room in the school, but the second somebody walks in through that door, all eyes are on you. Everybody in the corridor is waiting for you to come out and be like, oh my God, you had to go to counseling. So that, if that stigma can be reduced somehow, for example, if instead of having a separate room, they were put with the teachers in a staff room, all right, there's a lot less lot less scrutiny that you're put under when something like that happens. It's a very small change that a school can make, but it will make it a lot more easier, especially for teens who are going through the entrance exam situation, especially for those people who need a lot of support. It'll make a lot of difference. It'll make a lifetime of difference.
It is very right that a student spends most of, and we all of us spend such a big portion of our life in institutions, in schools, and it is very important that they know how to be considerate and they know how to deal with this. Now, not all students are privileged enough to choose their colleges, like even based on their, let's say, research interests or how good or bad the program is. But there's only usually 1% of students with excellent grades and with great financial backgrounds and everything. But most of the other students, of course, they work hard as well, but they are not privileged enough to choose their colleges based on something. Do you think even that students should consider where an institution stands in terms of the mental health awareness and support before applying? And also, if by chance you know of any institutions with like incredible mental health practices that you mentioned, is there some inspiration behind the examples that you gave? Do you know of any institutions that do?
So I think, especially for students with a history of mental health issues, it's pretty important to look for institutions that are supportive of such issues. You do not want to be overworked, or you don't want to lose opportunities based on the kind of stigma that it might cause. So it's better to choose an institution that is known to be, at least aware of these issues and supportive as much as they possibly can. Because when you go to, especially when you go to college, you're going away from the place that you've known for a long, long time. Your entire environment changes. So you have to talk to people and figure it out, because I trust word of mouth more than university web pages. Maybe a university can say that, or a university or a college can say that they have you know a number of therapists available and access to, but that does not mean that the work environment will be as supportive as you would want it to be. So talk to probably seniors from the same college, people who have passed out, people who are currently studying there. Word I trust word of mouth on this fully. If you ask for any particular institutions, I don't have anything like off the top of my head right now, but I do think overall things are improving, since a lot of people are now beginning to recognize this issue, and so are the institutions. So I feel like it's a lot better for us now than it might have been like a decade ago. And even outside the institution, it's a little more easier to get access to you know any help that you might require.
So, since we were talking about getting into colleges, and we also talked about how draining giving entrance exams are and stuff, I know that you yourself have spent some time giving entrance exams, spent some time getting into the MSc program that you are now in. So, can you tell us about that experience and how difficult or easy things were for you at that time?
So after I finished my bachelor's, immediately the question of, oh my God, where are you doing your master's came up. And for me, the choice was not, it was neither easy nor hard. The hard part was mostly because of personal issues that were going on in my life. Because at that point in time, I was coming out of like the depths of my depressive phase. So to find the energy to actually fill in the applications, to write the essays that were required, to write the entrance exams that were required, it was harder for me to find the energy to put into it than the actual process itself. And for me specifically, because I knew exactly where I wanted to go and what I wanted to work on, it was a little bit more easier than for students who do not have that sort of path set for them, who have not figured out what exactly they would like to follow in their career. So I feel like for me it was sort of half and half. It was both easy in some ways, hard in some ways. But for students who do not know what they want to do, especially, things would be a lot easier if there were guidelines telling them, how to apply, where to apply, what can you apply for, because there are a lot of opportunities in this world that people don't recognize, people don't realize that exist. Not if you go to a random person and ask, hi, do you know what a master's in science research looks like, people are going to be blank. So communication about such things is also very, very important.
Very true, very true. In fact, the two themes, these are the two terms that I use very often in my conversations. One is unanswered questions that our students like you and me have all the time, and the second is mentorship. Those two things, they are like a part and parcel of a student's life. They always have these unanswered questions, and they really don't know who to go to, where to go to. And I think that mentors could really help with that. But did you have somebody like that? I mean, in the institution and outside, of course, outside of it, you have a lot of people. We meet a lot of people. We have family, friends, and all of that. But especially in the institutions, within the institutions, did you have somebody to guide you with all of this, and who is also like aware of the mental health issues, or the phase that you were going through? Was there somebody to guide you through that?
Oh, definitely. So I did my bachelor's in the University of Hyderabad, like I said. So at that point, while I was finishing up my bachelor's, it was right at almost at the end of the pandemic. While it was still hard for us to go and do our labs, there were a lot of issues surrounding getting my degree, and it was also right at the rock bottom of my depressive phase. So I had almost decided that I would not continue my education for a couple more years, but I had three very, very important professors in my life, three people who were extremely supportive, extremely sweet to me, and they are Dr. Krishnaveni Mishra, Dr. Sanjay Subodh, and Dr. Nagarajaram. Two of them were in the same department as me, Department of Biology, and one of them was the director of the College of Integrated Sciences that was there. And these three, they pushed me so hard when I required it. When I felt like giving up, they were there and telling me, hi, we have seen you for 3 years. We know what you're like and we know what you're capable of. So do not stop here. It was more of personal help than academic help that I required at that point, and that is exactly what they gave me. But they also did give me academic help. They sent me possible MSCs that I could apply for. They sent me newsletters, they sent me scholarship advice, and overall they were extremely sweet, and they I would credit me getting into this institution to the most part to them.
Very nice, very nice. I think we are both privileged in that I've had amazing mentors, and I think that every student deserves that. Every institute should have an open, friendly space for people to just share about what is really going on in their life, so that they can focus their energies on their work. Speaking of which, ragging, bullying, gender biases, all of these things, even the academic pressures that we talked about, they're literally far from being issues of the past. So, what can we really do to be more inclusive and empathetic? I know this is a long discussion, but if you can just brief us with that, and also because especially we need to focus on maximum scientific outcome. Uh, how can we possibly dilute these obstructions, if at all, and how can we focus on science?
So yes, gender bias is discrimination in any form, whether that's sexual orientation, gender, caste, age, any sort of ragging, bullying. All of this is still going on, though we think that we've progressed a lot. It's stuff that still happens, and I think as part of the scientific community, it is very, very necessary that we learn how to be empathetic towards everybody, and keep it inclusive fully, because the science community is seen as a sort of gatekeeping group by a lot of people, because they're all they're all people who know how to science well but not emote well, if that makes a little sense. They find it hard. A lot of scientists, especially older scientists that I've seen, find it a little more hard to incorporate empathy into their work. They expect only output and nothing else. So the journey towards getting the output is not as well seen in scientific communities as opposed to others. The easiest way to deal with this is, one, to validate the issues that people are going through, to make sure that they feel seen, they feel heard, because at some point or the other everybody is going to go through a low point, even if it's not clinical depression. It does not have to be. Sometimes sometime or the other everybody is going to go through a low point, and at that point it is very important that they are heard, they are understood, and instead of seeing it as an obstacle that you have to sort of move jump over, it needs to be something that they can work through together. So this especially is more important to mentors and professors than it is to students, because students will most likely help each other through things, but for mentors the output of the students is very important, because a lot of their reputation also hangs on the line. So instead of just looking at the output itself, if you can validate the issues and work through it together, know that they are supported through the actual process of working through it as well, it would be amazing. And when you talk about scientific output, of course, we all want the best to come out, but I feel like the more we try to push ourselves, the less results we might get. In the sense, if the person who is working on it is not fully all right, if they're not comfortable with the work, the results are going to be subpar. Only when the person emotionally, physically, mentally is fully ready to do the work can you get optimal results. So mental health and mental wellness is definitely a big part in getting the maximum scientific output that you can, because what you want to be able to do is to focus all your energy on your work rather than, figuring out how to fight the system with, or whatever mental health issue that you're going through.
Very well said. I think that it is very easy to lose sight when you are in an academic setting, like as in a lab, working in a lab, or in an institution where you have to get your thesis ready, all of that. It's really easy to lose sight of the human life that we are living, especially for professors. They are thinking about the project all the time, and they forget sometimes that these are humans and they have a personal life beyond of this. So yeah, that is very important. I know that this is a little tangent over here, but would you also like to share how IISER has been for you? Because you have been doing a lot of great things, and I'm sure that there's a supportive environment that has been provided. Would you like to tell us about that a little bit? Your experience at IISER so far, and especially with regards to mental health awareness.
So when I first came to IISER, I did not know what to expect, because at that point I was looking for master's programs outside of India. And I sort of prepped myself for the culture shock that might happen. And suddenly I find myself back in home ground because this is in my state. Uh, the decision to come back to India, as in not go outside, that decision was made because I wanted to focus a little bit more on my mental health. And I felt like going outside would lead to me being more isolated from everybody that I knew. So at least in Kerala, it would be much easier for me, if necessary, to go back to my family, to go back to my friends, to go back to a sense of comfort. But I realized once I came to IISER that I found a sense of comfort here as well, because more than academics, the people here have changed me since, because it's in the middle of nowhere. Our campus is very removed from the city. So the sense of community that they have here is very strong, because all you have is us kind of a situation here. So it that sense of communities made my transition from my earlier campus to this much easier than I would have expected it to be. And even with the friendships that I made here aside, the academic community is also very nice and very helpful. Most people in the community would rather see you move forward than to push you down to get further themselves. As well, if you speak of the mental health, we do have access to some great psychiatrists and psychologists here as well. And even though I did go through a very low phase in the middle of this, it was mostly my friends who sort of pushed me through that and let me get to where I am today. So I'm very thankful for them.
Awesome. There are indeed all of these elements, friendships, the institution, all of it plays a very important role, really, in how our mental health is shaped. Also, the question that you and I have been really waiting to discuss. I know that you have been working very specifically on this in IISER, but before we get to it, would you like to tell us briefly about igem, what it is, how it works, everything, and then, of course, followed by the project that you are undertaking for it?
Of course. So IGEM stands for International Genetically Engineered Machine, and it's an annual synthetic biology competition. It started off in MIT as a chance for, especially for undergraduate and master's students, to work a little more on their own projects rather than things that are sort of thrown at them by the curriculum. It allowed the students to choose what they wanted to work on and find solutions. So, as the IGEM CEO says, it's all about local people solving local problems around the world. So, for us, how it works is that once you join, you have a process for ideation. So, you think very hard about what particular problem that you would like to solve, what you think would create a global impact or a social impact around you, that you select that problem, and then once you select it and you try to figure out how to use synthetic biology to solve it. And once that's done, we get help from student members, student mentors, ambassadors. We'll have PIs. It's a very big team that works on it. And in the end of this, once we have a solid project to show with good results, we show it at a program called the Grand Jamboree in Paris, where teams from all around the world, I think this year there's around more than 400 teams. And at Paris, in the final event, we will be judged and we will be checked for awards or other metrics that are required. But so if you want some more info
Yeah.
about the specific project that we're doing.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, when I first heard of it, I was literally mind blown, not just about the idea, but also with the outreach activities that you're planning. So, both of it, the project idea and the outreach activities that you are doing along with it to reach as many people as you can.
Yes. So our project very specifically works on major depressive disorder or clinical depression as it's known. The reason that I chose this is particularly because of the issues that I went through, as I mentioned earlier. And I realized that diagnosis is something that is very, very important. And it is something that needs to be fixed because currently the entire process of diagnosis goes through asking patients questions and then figuring out if those answers match a set definition of depression. And sometimes the diagnosis might not work out if it's looked at in a very, very qualitative. So we decided to take it one step further and look at it biologically. So we looked into an extensive literature review where we looked at what physical changes might occur in a person when they are undergoing clinical depression. And when that was happening, we decided that the easiest way to sort of diagnose somebody biologically would be through a blood sample. So we looked specifically at blood biomarkers. So biomarkers are basically any sort of molecule that you can associate with a particular disease, as in the absence or presence of this particular molecule would indicate the disease. So we looked specifically at a list of those, and after a very, very extensive search, we decided on choosing 5 of them that showed very clear associations with depression. And we figured out that if we can find the values of these in blood and compare the levels to that of a normal healthy patient, we would be able to diagnose depression from a singular blood test. So currently we're working on building the prototype for that. And as you mentioned about the outreach, so IGEM also focuses a lot on educating people about synthetic biology, about science, and about whatever we choose to make our projects on as well. So we've built an extensive outreach plan for that because we also feel that it aligns with our values, and we want to increase our mark, our impact as much as we can. So a couple of the things that we have planned that will be coming up soon are games. There's things that everybody from every sector of the population can do. So we did not want it to be sort of structured within academia for people who already understand science. We wanted it to also go out to those who do not have as much exposure to science, of any age, any group, people who are in school, people who are in colleges, the general public, anybody. We want something to aim at them. So we have a general theme for our outreach, which is science through unconventional teaching methods. So we wanted to, instead of focusing on the regular books and slides, learning from that, we wanted to see how else we could teach people. And we decided on going at it through games, through art, through especially through local art forms that we have, and any way where people can live and experience and understand science rather than reading about it and memorizing facts.
This is my personal favorite part about your project, because it's just not hypothetically places a situation in front of somebody and then tells that this is gonna solve your problems, but it really connects with that individual, which is very much helpful, because otherwise it is really difficult to know what you are really getting into. But just to make it a little more simpler for the audience of this podcast, and you did a little bit of that, but can you like navigate us through the science of this in detail? And I know that in the coming days you will have much more to say about this, but where are you at the scientific process, and what are you planning in the coming days?
Of course. So when we're speaking about the science of the project, like I said, we're working with biomarkers, the molecules that I mentioned, whose levels indicate some sort of abnormality or disease in the person. And we're focusing on 5 of them. And how the project works is that from a particular amount of blood that we get from the patient, we will have to quantify the levels of all 5 of these. So the synthetic bio part of this particular project would be building the quantifiers. So we want to make sure that whatever we're building to assess these levels are as specific and as efficient as possible. So that is our main experimental work. So how this works is, the 5 biomarkers that we've chosen are 2 microRNAs, which are very small RNA molecules that play a lot of regulatory roles in the entire body. The 2 that we have chosen play specific roles in the neural system. The other 3 are something called serotonin, which most of us have heard of as the happiness molecule, something called cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and a protein called the GS alpha protein, which plays a role in the cell's response to neurotransmitters. So the reason that we picked 5 of these, first of all, is that we wanted to look at depression at multiple levels. Because depression is a very heterogeneous disease. It can be caused by multiple things, and the way the symptoms are presented can also be very different. So we do not want to focus on one particular biomarker and miss out on a diagnosis because that biomarker is not involved in this patient's, response to depression. That's why we chose these 5. Now, about quantifying them. So for the microRNAs, how we will quantify them is using something called a nanoprobe. So I know it sounds all fancy, but imagine, you must have all seen bobby pins, the ones that your mom uses, the black ones. So it has 2 pointy ends and 1 curved end. It's like a very elongated U, right? So now imagine that, but made of DNA instead. So at the curved part, we have a sequence which will be complementary to the microRNA that we're looking, right? So once the structure is made, once you make a nanoprobe, to each of the pointed ends, all right, you will add something known as a fluorophore and something known as a quencher. So a fluorophore is a molecule that can give you fluorescence when it's excited, and a quencher is a molecule that stops this from happening. So when the nanoprobe is just randomly sitting there, the fluorophore and the quencher are put very close together because they're just there together, and because of this, you won't get any fluorescence from the solution. Now, if I add the target to this, if I add the target microRNA, what we're looking for to this, it will bind to the complementary sequence in the curved part. And once that happens, the pointed ends are sort of pulled apart. When it's pulled apart, the quencher is a little too far from the fluorophore to do its function, which means the fluorophore is now free to give out a signal. And you'll get that in the form of a visible fluorescence. Now, for the other, what we will be doing is making something known as an aptamer. Again, another fancy word, but an aptamer is basically a group of nucleotides that are made, a molecule made of a group of nucleotides that are made to bind to the structure of one molecule. So it is very specifically made to target one particular kind of molecule. In our cases, we will be using it to target serotonin, cortisol, and the GS alpha protein. And how this aptamer works is that you have an aptamer that is built specifically for your target, and you have a complementary DNA in a part of it. A complementary DNA is a very short strand of DNA, maybe 5 to 6 nucleotides, that will bind to a small part of your aptamer. When the target is in solution, when the target is around, the aptamer would rather bind to the target than keep the cDNA, right? So it will bind to the target, and in the process, it will push the cDNA away. So what we've done is we'll put the same set of fluorophore and quencher on the aptamer and cDNA as well. So the cDNA will have a quencher and the aptamer will have a fluorophore. So when it's inert, because of the quencher's action, there will be no fluorescence visible. But once it actually binds to the target that we're looking for, then the cDNA is pushed away along with the quencher, which will allow the fluorophore to give us a signal. Now, to make this entire process a bit more easier and more accessible, we will be putting this into a microfluidic chip. It's a lot of fancy words, I know, I'm sure, but a microchip is basically a small chip, all right, maybe the size of a credit card, where this entire process can happen with a very small amount of blood. So most of you must have seen glucometers and how they work using a very small paper strip. So this is just a slightly bigger version of that, right? So once you add in your blood, all these processes will happen, and at the end of it, you will get a fluorescence reader, which will be read by a portable fluorimeter.
All right. Thank you so much for that brief descriptions there. That is exactly what I wanted. But I'm sure that I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure that people will have a lot of questions about the process and the project itself, and I will push them your way. But I think that you will very soon also have a website which will give the entire information of this project and this stuff. So, would you like to tell a little bit about that?
Yes, our website will be up pretty soon. But if anybody wants to contact us, you can always contact us on Instagram, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn, where our team name is igem IISER TVM. So that's IGEM underscore IISER TVM. And we're always free to talk. We'd love to discuss more about the project with you if you're interested.
Awesome. I'll just add those details in the description. Also, just to sum up our conversation, can you tell about the scope of this project and its reach? Like for me, when this device or the kit becomes available and accessible, what will be its impact on me as an individual, and how can it change my life? How can it be helpful to me?
So I feel like the scope of this project is again on multiple levels, because as a person, as an individual who might be going through something like this, it will help validate your diagnosis much faster than it would compared to traditional methods. So you don't have to wait for months and years like I did to get an answer to where your problems lie. Because once you know that, okay, you have depression, it's a lot clearer on what you'll have to do and how to go about it, rather than spending a long time wondering what's wrong with you. That is on an individual level. But if you look at it on a much bigger picture, if you're able to get a physical diagnosis, all right, which is something that you cannot fake. A blood test is something that you cannot fake as compared to something that you can speak about. You can always lie through a diagnosis with a psychiatrist or a psychologist if you're afraid of the diagnosis. Maybe people have many reasons to lie through it, but a biological diagnosis is not something that you can fake. And with that, I think a lot of the stigma around this will be, lessened a bit, because it's a lot easier for people to trust something that is visible. It's easier for them to trust something that, oh, this is a diagnostic test, it's validated by a diagnostician, a clinician. This must make sense. This must be true. And with that reduced stigma, it will make the lives of a lot of people much easier.
Well, IGEM apart, I think many people will be looking forward to this. I personally myself am looking forward to how this turns out to be. Also, because we should and we need to talk about this, are there any concerns that you also have regarding this project or what you are doing currently?
So, as with any diagnosis, there is obviously a chance of false positives, false negatives. People do not haven't really worked with biomarkers to the extent that we would like, because biomarkers have been clearly shown as a possible, revolution in the diagnostic systems. But people are scared to work on them simply because what if the research doesn't get me anywhere? So people tend to work on things that they know will give them results. So whether that's Parkinson's, whether that's cancer, Alzheimer's, the research focuses on areas where they know that they will get viable answers. But with depression, because it's a harder disease to battle, in the sense the physical aspect is not the only thing, there is also a mental aspect to it. A lot of researchers shy away from researching this particular topic. So rather than a problem with our project, I would also like to use it as a call for attention to more people researching this, because there is quite a big gap in the literature about this that needs to be filled in. And as undergraduate students, there's only so much that we can do. But hopefully, bigger people, bigger professors, bigger researchers with more capabilities will be able to take this up.
Well, I'm really glad and thank you in fact for taking this up. This was really needed, and I don't agree with the point that as undergrads there's only so much you can do. I think that there's a lot you can do, and I think you will do a lot, and we'll all be looking forward to that. Well, to again end our conversation, I this is something I love to ask all the people that come to my podcast, and I'm really looking forward for you to answer this. With the experience that you now have, with all the adventurous experiences that you now have, if you were to relive your undergrad days, what do you think you would do differently?
I think I would just try to live a little more than, spend a lot of my time being stressed out about, oh no, what happens next? What can I do now to make my future a little better? All of these are definitely important questions, but I think a lot of us lose out on the present, on whatever is happening around us currently, because we're so scared about what comes next. So I'd like to enjoy all of that a little bit more. If I got the chance to relive it, I would, spend more time in the canteen with my friends, go drink lemon tea, go outside, have a little bit more fun than just focusing on, okay, I have to get my master's, I have to get my PhD. I did have amazing friends and an amazing undergraduate experience, which I would not replace. But to make it better, I would have just liked, live a little bit more.
And that was it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it and found it insightful. If you have any questions or queries for us or for Abha, you can reach out to us on our respective social media handles linked in the description. The IGEM TVM team is also taking up a lot of outreach and awareness activities to help people out and make an effort towards community building. Feel free to reach out to them on their social media handles or email, which are also linked in the description. I will see you in the next episode. Till then, stay healthy, stay happy, and keep listening to the Purple Science Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Purple Science Podcast. We share stories every Tuesday.
Our inbox is always open for your feedback, and our DMs across all social media platforms linked in the description are open to your unique stories. If you know somebody who might benefit from this, do share the podcast with them and spread the joy of learning.